mechanistic target of rapamycin, mTOR, the master switch of cellular life. A row of moai statues on Easter Island, Rapa Nui. Soil bacteria from this remote island produced a compound, rapamycin, that helped scientists discover mTOR, the mechanistic target of rapamycin. In the 1960s, scientists exploring the soil of Easter Island, locally known as Rapa Nui, stumbled upon a peculiar compound produced by bacteria. They named it rapamycin after the island. Little did they know this discovery would unveil a master switch inside our cells that influences everything from how our muscles grow to how we age. That master switch is mTOR, the mechanistic, formerly mammalian target of rapamycin. In this video, we'll embark on a journey to understand what mTOR is, why it's so pivotal for health, and how tweaking this one pathway could mean new therapies for cancer, neurodegeneration, and even aging. Imagine there's a central command hub in your cells, a sort of cellular traffic light that turns green to signal grow, build, and reproduce, and red to signal stop, conserve, and repair. mTOR is exactly that, a protein kinase that acts as a central regulator, connecting the dots between the nutrients you eat, the hormones in your blood, and the needs of your cells. It's as if each cell has an internal thermostat for growth. When conditions are right, food is abundant, signals say go, mTOR cranks up the heat, driving growth. When resources are scarce or stress hits, mTOR dims, and the cell shifts into maintenance mode. This balance is vital. Too much growth for too long can lead to problems like cancer or accelerated aging, whereas too little can cause stunted development or frailty. Before we dive deeper, here's a roadmap for the next 30 minutes. First, we'll break down what mTOR does in the body. Next, we'll meet mTOR's two teams, mTOR C1 and mTOR C2, and see how they differ. Then, we'll explore how mTOR links to major health topics: cancer, aging, brain diseases, and rare genetic disorders. We'll also discuss how everyday lifestyle choices, like what and when you eat or how you exercise, can dial mTOR up or down. Along the way, we'll keep it conversational and relatable, no PhD in biology required. Finally, we'll wrap up with practical takeaways and a peek into future breakthroughs. Stay tuned. This journey through the command center of our cells might change how you think about food, exercise, and even longevity. What is mTOR? The cell's master regulator. Let's start with the basics. mTOR is a highly conserved protein kinase enzyme present in almost all eukaryotic cells, from yeast to humans. In plain language, that means it's a type of protein that adds phosphate groups to other proteins, thereby altering their function. But what makes mTOR special is what it regulates. mTOR acts as a central hub that senses and integrates a wide range of environmental cues: nutrients, like amino acids and glucose, energy levels, oxygen, and growth factors, like insulin and IGF-1, and in response, it orchestrates cell growth and metabolism. It's like the conductor of an orchestra, ensuring all the instruments, cellular processes, play in harmony to either build things up or tone things down as needed. Growth mode, mTOR on. When you eat a meal rich in protein or sugar, or when growth signals flood in, say during childhood or after a workout, mTOR turns on. It triggers a cascade of anabolic building processes. Cells ramp up protein synthesis, make new lipids, fats, and membranes, and grow. At the same time, mTOR signals the cell to cancel housekeeping. It temporarily suppresses a cellular recycling process called autophagy. Think of autophagy as the cell's cleanup crew that takes out the trash and recycles old parts. When food is plentiful, the priority is expansion, not cleanup. mTOR effectively locks the dumpster and tells the crew to chill for now. The result? Cells increase in size, divide, and build up reserves. This is great for, say, a developing organism or building muscle after exercise. Analogy: mTOR on is like a city in boom time. New skyscrapers are going up everywhere, and maintenance is deferred until later. Maintenance mode: mTOR off or low. Now imagine you're fasting or under stress. Nutrients are low. In this scenario, mTOR activity falls off or to a dim setting. The cell shifts gears from growth to survival. Autophagy, the cleanup crew we mentioned, gets unleashed to haul away damaged components and recycle materials. Protein synthesis slows. Instead of making new proteins, the cell starts conserving energy and repairing itself. This is like that city declaring a construction moratorium and focusing on fixing roads and infrastructure. Turning mTOR down triggers what scientists call a starvation response, essentially a survival mode that, as it turns out, can be very healthy in the right context. For instance, short-term fasting or caloric restriction in organisms leads to lower mTOR activity, which in turn ramps up autophagy and stress resistance, often linked to anti-aging benefits. We'll cover that later. The reason it's called the target of rapamycin is literally because rapamycin, that Easter Island compound, binds to mTOR and inhibits it. When scientists discovered rapamycin could halt cell growth, it made yeast cells act as if they were starving. They realized there must be a target protein in cells that rapamycin was hitting. They eventually identified mTOR as that target, unlocking a whole field of research. Rapamycin effectively mimics a nutrient-poor state to the cell, flipping mTOR's switch to off. In fact, adding rapamycin to cells in a petri dish or to organisms triggers many of the same effects as fasting. Cells stop proliferating at the growth phase of the cell cycle, and autophagy increases. We'll see how rapamycin's mTOR blocking ability became a double-edged sword, useful for certain therapies and potentially lifespan extension, but also coming with side effects, since you're essentially tricking cells into a constant low-nutrient alarm. Now that we have a grasp of mTOR as a master regulator, let's zoom in a little further. It turns out mTOR doesn't work alone. It's part of two different complexes. Think of it like one superhero with two different costumes, each with its own powers. mTOR C1 and mTOR C2, two teams, two missions. mTOR in our cells actually exists in two distinct molecular teams known as mTOR C1 and mTOR C2. mTOR complex 1 and 2. Both complexes have mTOR at their core, but they have different partner proteins, and therefore respond to different signals and carry out different tasks. If mTOR is like a versatile character, mTOR C1 and mTOR C2 are two modes or teams that character can be part of. mTOR C1, the builder and fast responder. mTOR C1 is the complex that we mostly described in the growth mode above. It includes partner proteins like Raptor. Think of Raptor as a scaffold that helps mTOR C1 recognize specific targets, and is acutely sensitive to rapamycin. mTOR C1 is activated by plenty of nutrients, especially amino acids, like the leucine from protein-rich foods, as well as growth factors and high cellular energy. When on, mTOR C1 rapidly boosts protein synthesis by phosphorylating key effectors such as S6K1 and 4E-BP1. These are proteins that directly upregulate the cell's protein-making machinery. It also promotes the production of lipids and nucleotides, all the building blocks needed for growth. And as mentioned, mTOR C1 curtails autophagy, the recycling program, during times of plenty. In short, mTOR C1 is like the foreman of a construction site. When building materials, nutrients, are delivered, it gives the go-ahead to all crews to start building and expanding. This complex operates relatively quickly, within minutes of, say, you downing a protein shake or your blood insulin rising after a meal. mTOR C1 will be activated at the surfaces of cellular organelles like lysosomes to execute the growth program. mTOR C2, the coach and stabilizer. mTOR C2 is the lesser-known sibling but equally important. It includes different partners, such as Richter and cyan-1, and is not immediately inhibited by rapamycin. Standard doses of rapamycin don't shut it down right away, though prolonged rapamycin can eventually affect it. mTOR C2 responds primarily to growth factors like insulin, IGF-1, and certain other signals, including some cell stress cues. Instead of directly driving protein synthesis, mTOR C2's job is more about cell survival, metabolism, and organization. It activates a family of kinases called AGC kinases. In doing so, mTOR C2 influences the cell's cytoskeleton, the internal scaffolding that gives cells shape and the ability to move. and helps control metabolic responses. For example, when insulin binds to your cells, it sends a cascade of signals that should ultimately increase glucose uptake and storage. mTOR-C2 plays a key role in this by fully activating ACT, which then can signal the cell to insert glucose transporters into the membrane, among other tasks. You can think of mTOR-C2 as a coach or tuning specialist. It doesn't initiate the sprint, but it makes sure the runner, the cell, is in the right condition to run. It keeps the cell responsive to insulin, helps it survive stressful conditions, and adjusts the cytoskeleton like a coach positioning players on a field. Interestingly, research shows that mTOR-C2 can be activated not only by an abundance of signals, but sometimes also by scarcity. For instance, certain studies suggest when cells are low on glutamine or glucose, mTOR-C2 kicks in as a pro-survival mechanism, possibly helping the cell adapt its metabolism during stress. mTOR-C2 ensures the cell's environment and internal state are optimized. Key differences to remember. mTOR-C1 acts quickly to nutrient availability and is all about growth and buildup, anabolism, while mTOR-C2 is more about long-term regulation of cell physiology, ensuring cells respond to hormones and maintaining cell structure and survival. Importantly, optimal health requires both complexes to be balanced. Researchers note that optimal activity of both mTOR-C1 and mTOR-C2 is necessary for metabolic health and preventing disease, as well as potentially prolonging health span. If one or the other is out of whack, say mTOR-C1 is overactive all the time or mTOR-C2 is suppressed, problems arise. For instance, chronic rapamycin, which inhibits mTOR-C1 and, over time, mTOR-C2, in animals can lead to glucose intolerance because mTOR-C2 ACT signaling and insulin response gets hampered. It's a reminder that while dialing down mTOR can have benefits like extended lifespan, it can also cause side effects like insulin resistance if not done carefully. More on that soon. Now that we've met mTOR's two alter egos, you might be wondering, why should we care so much about this pathway? The answer, mTOR touches nearly every aspect of our physiology. When it runs too hot or too cold for too long, it's involved in diseases ranging from cancer to diabetes to neurodegenerative disorders. And when we modulate it just right, it holds promise for therapies in those diseases and maybe even slowing aging. Let's explore mTOR's role in health and disease and how scientists and doctors are trying to harness this master switch for therapy. mTOR in health and disease, why it matters. Cancer. When the growth switch sticks on, cancer is essentially cells growing out of control. Given mTOR's role as the growth regulator, it's no surprise that many cancers show hyperactive mTOR signaling. Imagine a construction foreman, mTOR-C1, that ignores red lights and just keeps building non-stop. That's what happens in many tumors. Mutations in pathways, like PI3K, ACT, or loss of the tumor suppressor PTEN, remove the brakes on mTOR, making it think nutrients and growth signals are abundant even when they shouldn't be. The result is continuous cell growth and division. mTOR-C1 drives tumor cells to keep making proteins, membranes, and everything needed to form a growing mass. This is why mTOR became an important target for cancer therapy research. Aging and longevity, turning down mTOR for a longer life. One of the most jaw-dropping discoveries in aging research in the past 2 decades is that inhibiting mTOR can extend lifespan in multiple organisms. This was first seen in simple organisms like yeast, worms, and flies. But the big splash came in 2009, when a landmark study showed that mice fed rapamycin starting in midlife lived significantly longer, about 9% longer for male mice and 14% longer for females on average. Imagine that. A drug from a remote island soil made middle-aged mice live into older age than their untreated peers. These results have since been repeated and expanded. Rapamycin not only extends lifespan in mice, but also delays or reduces the severity of several age-related diseases, like cancers, cognitive decline, heart dysfunction, in animal models. It's as if turning down that growth pathway in adulthood gives the body more time for maintenance and stress resistance, kind of slowing the ticking clock of aging. How might this work? Scientists believe that chronic high mTOR activity, driven by constant food availability and high calorie intake, may accelerate aging by pushing cells into overdrive, Less time for repair, more accumulation of damage. Lowering mTOR activity intermittently via strategies like caloric restriction or rapamycin flips cells into repair mode regularly, preventing the buildup of cellular garbage and damage that contributes to aging. Indeed, caloric restriction, the most proven lifespan-extending intervention in lab animals, naturally lowers mTOR signaling and boosts autophagy, which is thought to clear out misfolded proteins and damaged organelles that otherwise would gunk up our cells as we age. But the bottom line is exciting. By dialing down the mTOR pathway strategically, we might improve health span, the period of life spent in good health, and possibly lifespan. It's not a magic youth potion, and certainly not an excuse to take rapamycin on your own without medical guidance, but it opens the door to a whole new way of thinking about aging as a modifiable molecular process. Neurodegenerative diseases, cleaning house in the brain. Diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and other neurodegenerative conditions are characterized by the accumulation of misfolded proteins or dysfunctional components in brain cells. One hypothesis is that boosting the brain cell's cleanup process, autophagy, could help clear these toxic aggregates. It appears that turning down mTOR allows brain cells to better recycle clumps of proteins that otherwise would accumulate and harm neurons. There's also evidence that excessive mTOR signaling might directly contribute to neural problems. Interestingly, overactive mTOR has been observed in the brains of Alzheimer's patients, which could impede autophagy and exacerbate disease. So mTOR is at a crossroads of aging and brain health. However, as always, the balance is key. Neurons also need mTOR-C2 for survival signals. Metabolic disorders, diabetes, obesity, a double-edged sword. Metabolic issues like type 2 diabetes and obesity also intersect with mTOR. When we eat, insulin levels rise, and insulin activates mTOR-C1 via AKT in tissues like muscle and liver to help promote anabolic metabolism. However, chronic nutrient overload, too many calories for too long, can lead cells to keep mTOR-C1 mostly on. The body sometimes responds with insulin resistance, a hallmark of type 2 diabetes, partly through a negative feedback. Overactive mTOR/S6K1 signaling can phosphorylate and inhibit insulin receptor substrate, IRS proteins, dampening the insulin signal. Essentially, if mTOR is constantly saying, "We've got nutrients," because of overeating, it eventually causes the insulin pathway to become less sensitive, making it harder for cells to take up glucose. This can contribute to elevated blood sugar. In obesity, especially when accompanied by high sugar intake, mTOR-C1 is often hyperstimulated, which may drive fat cell growth and even inflammation in tissues. That said, mTOR-C2 is crucial for the positive side of insulin's effects. mTOR-C2 helps insulin properly stimulate glucose uptake. If mTOR-C2 is impaired, as can happen with chronic rapamycin usage, glucose metabolism suffers and insulin resistance can worsen. This is why rapamycin in rodents can cause a diabetic-like state at first. Intriguingly, some studies in mice found that long-term intermittent rapamycin might avoid this issue or even improve metabolic profiles after an initial dip, but it's complex. For our purposes, know that mTOR has to strike a balance in metabolism, enough activity to respond to insulin and maintain normal glucose levels, but not so much that it triggers insulin resistance. This tightrope walk is an active area of research. For instance, could we design ways to inhibit mTOR-C1 to get anti-aging or anti-cancer benefits without inhibiting mTOR-C2 to preserve insulin action? Some newer compounds and strategies aim to do this. In summary, mTOR is deeply woven into our health. From cancer to aging, brain function to metabolic balance, this pathway's activity needs to be just right. It's like Goldilocks porridge. Too much, and you have uncontrolled growth or metabolic disease. Too little, and you have stunted function or immunodeficiency. This is why scientists are so fascinated by mTOR. By understanding and modulating this single node, we tap into a network that influences many processes at once. It's also why any therapies targeting mTOR have to be handled with care, which brings us to a related topic. How can we influence mTOR ourselves outside of a lab? That's where lifestyle comes in. Now that we've seen how crucial mTOR's balance is, the next logical question is, can we control it through our daily choices? The answer is a resounding yes. Our diets, our meal timing, and our exercise habits all feed into mTOR's decision-making. Let's talk about how lifestyle can modulate mTOR, and how some lifestyle practices might reap benefits by nudging this pathway. Lifestyle modulation of mTOR, food, fasting, and fitness. It might sound abstract that a cellular pathway is influenced by our daily behaviors, but mTOR is literally designed to respond to what we eat and how we live. Here are some key lifestyle factors and how they dial mTOR activity up or down. Caloric restriction, CR, and intermittent fasting, IF. These are perhaps the most potent natural mTOR modulators. When you consistently consume fewer calories than your body needs, CR, or practice periodic fasting, going extended hours or days with little to no food, mTOR activity in your cells decreases because the nutrient and energy sensors report low fuel. In response, the body enhances maintenance pathways like autophagy and stress resistance, which is linked to longevity benefits in many organisms. Intermittent fasting, like eating only in an 8-hour window each day or doing 24-hour fasts weekly, similarly gives daily or weekly periods of low mTOR activity. Indeed, IF has been shown to induce autophagy in multiple tissues, improve insulin sensitivity, reduce inflammation, and even boost brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, in the brain, all of which align with a transient dip in mTOR signaling and activation of longevity pathways. The up and down cycling of mTOR may actually be ideal. When you do eat, especially protein, mTOR C1 goes up, which is important for things like muscle maintenance. But then you have a fasting period where mTOR C1 goes down, allowing cleanup and reset. This cycling might be healthier than keeping mTOR constantly high, as in round-the-clock eating, or constantly low, which could occur in severe malnutrition. It's all about balance and timing. Protein intake and leucine. Not all nutrients affect mTOR equally. Amino acids, particularly leucine, found richly in protein foods like meat, dairy, eggs, legumes, are key activators of mTOR C1. This is why bodybuilders often take leucine-rich whey protein. It spikes mTOR in muscle, stimulating muscle protein synthesis. Eating a high-protein meal will robustly activate mTOR C1 in your liver and muscle for a couple of hours. That's beneficial for preserving muscle mass and aiding recovery. However, constantly high protein intake, especially if coupled with overall high calories, might keep mTOR C1 chronically elevated. Some scientists theorize that moderately lower protein intake in adulthood, without malnutrition, could be a factor in longevity due to less mTOR stimulation. This has been observed in some animal models. It's a delicate trade-off. You need enough protein for health, but excessive intake might accelerate aging pathways via mTOR. The safe takeaway is likely moderation and timing, e.g. concentrating protein around workouts or earlier in the day, and not grazing on protein 24/7. Exercise, especially resistance exercise. During exercise, especially intense endurance exercise, your energy levels drop and AMPK, the energy sensor, can rise, which may temporarily suppress mTOR. You don't want to be making new proteins in the middle of sprinting from a lion. You want energy diverted to immediate use. However, after exercise, things change. If it's resistance training, lifting weights or strength training, there's a significant activation of mTOR C1 in the worked muscles during recovery, which is crucial for muscle repair and growth. In fact, studies show that blocking mTOR with rapamycin around exercise can prevent the muscle from growing stronger, because it blocks the protein synthesis response. So you want that mTOR spike after pumping iron. It's what tells the muscle, hey, use those amino acids to build new muscle fibers. Concurrently, endurance exercise like running or cycling doesn't stimulate muscle mTOR as strongly for growth, unless there's also protein intake, but it can improve insulin sensitivity and mitochondrial function in muscle, which might relate to a nuanced tuning of mTOR C2 and mTOR C1 over time. Interestingly, both aerobic exercise and resistance exercise, when done regularly, have been shown to enhance autophagy and proteostasis in the long run, similar to CR. It seems exercise creates a cyclic pattern. You create a stress, sometimes inhibiting mTOR briefly. Then during recovery, you get a beneficial burst of mTOR for growth, and the net effect is a healthier, more functional muscle. Moreover, because exercise improves insulin sensitivity, it indirectly helps keep mTOR signaling in a healthy range. Muscles that respond to insulin will take up nutrients without needing chronically high insulin levels. Part of that recovery is via mTOR-driven protein synthesis, and part of the stress adaptation is via transient mTOR suppression and autophagy during the workout. In summary, regular exercise balances mTOR activity. It gives periodic spikes for beneficial growth and periodic dips during energy stress, triggering cleanup. This oscillation likely contributes to why exercise is so good for healthy aging. It never lets your cells get too complacent in growth mode or too frail in maintenance mode. It teaches them to be metabolically flexible. Stress and other factors. Things like sleep, stress hormones, etc. also can affect mTOR, but in more complex ways. Chronic psychological stress might indirectly raise mTOR in some tissues due to hormonal effects, e.g., high cortisol can cause muscle wasting, which might involve mTOR suppression in muscle, but maybe increased mTOR in liver for gluconeogenesis. It's complicated. Good sleep and circadian rhythms likely help keep metabolic signals in sync, insulin, growth hormone, etc., which can keep mTOR rhythms natural. The main point: lifestyle is a powerful lever for mTOR. We've essentially evolved for a lifestyle of feast-famine cycles and physical exertion-rest cycles. By mimicking some of those, fasting, exercise, we can coax our mTOR to operate in a more youthfully rhythmic way, rather than being constantly stuck in feast mode. Balancing mTOR for health, takeaways, and future outlook. We've covered a lot of ground, from Easter Island to inner cell workings, from gym workouts to cutting-edge longevity research. So what can you, as a health enthusiast or student, take away from the mTOR story? Balance, growth, and repair. mTOR taught us that life is a balance between building up and breaking down. To promote long-term health, we should allow our bodies time in both modes. In practical terms, incorporate periods of low nutrient availability, like overnight fasts or occasional longer fasts if appropriate, and not just constant grazing. Allow recovery days if training hard. Periodically, let your cells do housekeeping. It's as important as the building phase. Leverage lifestyle. First, before considering any fancy drug, remember that diet and exercise are potent modulators of mTOR. You can likely get a lot of the theoretical longevity benefits simply by adopting practices like time-restricted eating, a balanced diet not overly high in processed carbs or proteins, and regular exercise, both resistance and aerobic. For example, exercise not only strengthens muscles via mTOR when you feed it, but also improves your metabolic flexibility, keeping mTOR signaling responsive and not insulin resistant. Intermittent fasting or even just avoiding late-night eating can give you a daily autophagy boost without any pills. These interventions have scientific backing for improving markers of health, and they naturally ebb and flow mTOR activity in a beneficial rhythm. Modern life often gives the constant build signals, excess food, little rest, which means not enough cleaning happens. That's a recipe for long-term issues. By consciously creating some lean times and exercise stress, you're telling mTOR, hey, pause building and do maintenance. On the flip side, when you need to build, like growing up, pregnancy, or building muscle, it's okay that mTOR is active. That's its job. Finally, mTOR's story is part of a bigger paradigm shift. We're learning that aging and chronic diseases can be tackled by targeting fundamental processes. In closing, the mechanistic target of rapamycin is a mouthful of a name, but you can think of it more simply as the metabolic mastermind within you. It helped primitive organisms survive feast and famine, and today it's the key to understanding diseases of both excess and decline. By respecting the dual nature of mTOR, nurturing it when we need growth and easing its throttle when we need repair, we can strive for a healthier, longer life. The story of mTOR beautifully illustrates that sometimes the secret to advancing health is not a new invention, but relearning the wisdom of balance that our cells have known all along. Balance is the key.